She stood outside the cafe window, gasping for breath, her clothes slightly dusty, her hair tousled by the wind, and her eyes shimmering with a mix of hope and fear. She had finally reached the place she had dreamt of all week, 5 long miles on foot, because she couldn't afford the bus or a ride. The man inside checked his watch for the 4th time, disappointment already settling in his expression, as he wondered if he had been stood up. What he didn't know was that the woman who promised to meet him was silently praying for a miracle just a few steps away, terrified that her lateness would ruin everything before it even began. She arrived late to the blind date, because she walked 5 miles, and that wasn't even the most painful part of her story. Before the story unfolds, if you believe kindness and second chances can change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly matters. Her name was Amina, a soft-spoken, humble, and quietly resilient woman who life had not treated gently. At 26, she wasn't someone who expected much from the world anymore. Years of broken trust, financial struggles, and silent battles had left her tired, older in spirit than her age showed. Amina worked at a small tailoring shop where she spent her days stitching clothes she could never afford for herself. Her hands carried the marks of needle pricks, long nights, and exhaustion, but she carried her heart even more carefully. Wounded, yet still capable of love. She had never been on a blind date before. The idea made her nervous, yet hopeful. She had agreed only because a CO worker insisted that maybe it was time she allowed a little happiness into her life. On the morning of the date, everything went wrong. The small shared apartment where she lived with her cousin had no electricity the night before, making it impossible to iron her only decent outfit. She woke up before sunrise, heating water on a small stove to fix her hair and present herself well because it mattered to her, not out of vanity, but self-respect. She wanted to look like someone who deserved to be cared for. She packed her small purse, counted her money twice, and realized she had just enough for either transportation or a cup of tea at the cafe, not both. And so, she chose dignity. She chose to walk. The journey was long. Streets were dusty and crowded, the sun slowly rising, making the air heavy and warm. She walked past shops opening for the day, children heading to school, and people rushing to work. With each step, her excitement fought against the anxiety creeping into her chest. She walked through busy roads, narrow alleys, and across a bridge that made the distance feel endless. At one point, a car splashed muddy water onto her clothes, staining the hem of her dress. She paused, tears threatening to fall as she tried to clean herself, but then she took a deep breath. She couldn't give up. Not today, not on the one chance she hoped might change something, even if only inside her heart. By the time she reached the cafe, she was 35 minutes late. Through the window, she saw the man, tall, well-dressed, with a calm face that suggested he was patient but nearing disappointment. His name was Rayan, a kind-natured man with a wounded past of his own. He had agreed to this blind date reluctantly after years of loneliness carved quietly into his life. His last heartbreak had taught him not to expect much, but he still held on to a small flicker of hope that maybe someone genuine still existed. And so, he waited, glancing at the door every few minutes. The waitress had approached him twice, asking if he wanted to order or cancel the reservation. Amina hesitated outside, her hand trembling on the door handle. In that moment, she felt small, like she didn't belong in a place where people came in cars, wore perfume she couldn't afford, and lived easier lives. She feared he would judge her for being late, for her appearance, or worse, for her truth. But she gathered the courage and stepped inside. Her entrance did not go unnoticed. Rayan looked up, and for a brief, suspended moment, their eyes met. A mixture of apology, vulnerability, and sincerity radiated from Amina's face. She approached the table, shoulders slightly hunched, clutching her purse like a shield. She could have lied about the delay, blamed traffic or an emergency, but she didn't know how to pretend. Instead, she began to explain, quietly, honestly, telling him she had walked because she didn't have the money for transport. She felt ashamed, exposed, certain that this confession would end the date before it began. But to her surprise, Rayan didn't show pity or embarrassment. Instead, his heart softened with respect. Her honesty struck him more deeply than any polished introduction could. The date began awkwardly, but something slowly shifted. Amina's sincerity, her gentle way of speaking, and her willingness to laugh at her own situation warmed the air between them. Rayan found himself unexpectedly drawn to her resilience. the quiet strength she didn't even realize she carried. He admired how she never spoke bitterly about her life, despite the hardship she lived with daily. She talked about small joys, sewing a perfect dress, watching sunsets from her rooftop, saving small amounts each month to buy a sketchbook one day, because she dreamed of designing clothes. She didn't complain. She dreamed even from the ground she stood on. Rayan shared his own experiences, a once comfortable life that shattered after his parents passed away, and a fiancé who left him when he needed support the most. He rebuilt himself slowly, learning that life was unpredictable and people weren't always what they seemed. The two found a connection in their brokenness, a comfort that didn't need perfection to feel real. It was a date unlike any they had ever experienced. Raw, heartfelt, genuine. As time passed, Rayan insisted on walking her home. At first, she refused, afraid he would see how far she had traveled on foot, but eventually she agreed. They walked the same 5-mile path, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't a journey of struggle, it was a journey of understanding. Along the way, they talked about life, dreams, pain, and hope. Rayan didn't judge her neighborhood or her living situation. In fact, the walk opened his eyes to the unseen realities of people he passed every day without noticing their difficulties. When they reached her building, Amina thanked him with sincerity that moved him deeply. She didn't expect to hear from him again, not because the date went badly, but because she had learned to keep expectations low. She had experienced too many disappointments to believe in fairy tale endings. She waved goodbye with a small but warm smile, believing that even if nothing came of this, the day itself was a gift. But Rayan did reach out. The next day, and the next. He treated her with respect, patience, and kindness. Not grand gestures, but genuine care. Slowly, Amina allowed herself to trust him. Their bond deepened not because of perfect circumstances, but because they cared for each other through imperfections. Weeks turned into months. Their relationship grew quietly, beautifully. Rayan encouraged her to pursue her dream of designing clothes, and he helped her buy that sketchbook she had saved so long for. Amina began sketching, and Rayan admired every design as if it were a masterpiece. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. 1 year later, they stood together outside a small boutique, Amina's very own. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was hers. The sign above the shop read, Amina's Threads of Hope. It was a small dream made real through resilience, love, and someone who believed in her. On the opening day, Amina looked at Rayan with gratitude that words couldn't express. She remembered that first blind date, the long walk, the fear of judgment, and she realized everything had led her here. Sometimes, the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. Years later, Amina and Rayan would tell their children the story of how their love began with a 5-mile walk and a late arrival that almost never happened. And every time they told it, they reminded them that love isn't found in perfection. It's found in honesty, courage, and the willingness to walk through hardship for someone who matters. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so more people can receive messages of hope, kindness, and second chances. Before we end, I have a special request. Comment below and tell us, do you believe one act of kindness can change someone's life? Thank you for watching. May your journey, no matter how difficult, lead you somewhere beautiful.